So I want to move on to a question I'd like to ask, and I'll try to characterize all the libertarians in the room. We're skeptical of war. We are skeptical that the war on poverty helped poor people, that we actually created more poor people and more dependency and more destruction of families and lives. We're skeptical of never-ending wars on terror. They seem to create more terror and more chaos, and all the while draining us of precious American lives and treasure. I view the war on drugs the same way, that we have been fighting in Latin America some 40, 50 years now, and created complete chaos. If you think there's a crisis at the border, you should spend some time in Honduras and Colombia and other places and wonder why families are risking everything to get to a place where it's safe, because we have devastated those communities. We've replaced any semblance of law and order with gang violence, drug cartels, and murderous outcomes. So this is a beef I have with the position that you've had, because you've wanted to solve the opioid crisis, particularly the fentanyl crisis, by doubling down on a war that I would view as an abject failure.
So let me start with where we agree, and then I'll tell you where I see some daylight. So where we agree is I am a deep skeptic of nearly every war we have fought in the last 50 years in our country. At the time, I was one of the weird guys on the left in college who was arguing even against the unconstitutional violations in Guantanamo, against much of our engagement in Iraq, even over-engagement in Afghanistan that went beyond a narrow mission in the wake of 9/11. So I think we share that foundation in common, and I'm the only candidate, at least in my party that I'm running in, that has openly committed to instantly end the Ukraine war with a peace deal and said exactly how I'm going to do it. Because I think it is likely to become Vietnam or Iraq all over again, and if we don't learn from our mistakes, we're going to keep repeating them at an even worse scale. So that's where I am on the war as war. I share your skepticism of the war on drugs. You don't hear me talk about the war on drugs. I'm not a war on drugs person. I think that under-discussed in both parties, but I'll speak for the party that I'm running in, is the demand side of this problem. It is easy to point your finger at somebody else. It is a lot harder, just like the Xi Jinping example I gave earlier. It's a lot harder to take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what is the mental health epidemic, the loss of purpose, the void of meaning in this country that results in people turning to fill in the blank. It was opioids 10, 15 years ago. It's fentanyl today. We have to address that. I think I'm probably the only person in the modern history of our party that is open to a conversation about, for veterans at least, let's start with PTSD, where there's good evidence of psychedelics from ayahuasca to ketamine. You could actually have an open discussion about rationally giving people off-ramps. I personally know parents whose kids have died who believe, and I think on good authority, that their kids could have at least survived by having an alternative path that didn't end in the way the fentanyl path ends for 200 Americans per day across this country. So far, I'm with you. Here's where I have a different perspective. It's the 85% I told you we'd agree on. Here's the 15% that we may not. I think that much of the fentanyl crisis right now, so I'm not an endless war on drugs person, but I'm very focused on much of what China, and I believe you just listen to what they're saying, it's true, recently, actually, we're talking the last decade, makes cheaper synthetic raw materials for the production of fentanyl that they're shipping to Mexican drug cartels. In fact, there's actually, according to upcoming books supposedly coming out in January, I'm told by Peter Schweitzer, there's 800 some odd chemists and or Chinese nationals in Mexico, south of our own border, more inexpensively making fentanyl that has, this is just factually true, expanded the profit margin, because you keep the revenue the same, the costs come down, the profit margins have expanded of the Mexican drug cartels as it relates to fentanyl in particular. And I do think that there is notwithstanding everything I said about the demand side problem, which I stand by and want to have bold solutions to address, I think in this particular case, I think there is a supply side element to the problem as well that has driven a rapid spike. I mean, the number of kids who have died of fentanyl overdoses or poisoning is up tenfold in the last 3 years. So in that particular case, I believe that this is a solvable problem by so long as you believe that we should have a border. I do. Not everyone has to share that belief in this room, but I do. If that's our national policy, then let's at least stand by that national policy and actually say we will, if we have a border, we say we mean it. We say 3 branches of government, we mean it, stand by it. Fine. We say we have a border, we mean it, let's stand by it. Secure that southern border using every mechanism we have available, including and up to using the U.S. military to secure the southern border. And then I think that that's how we address the supply side of this. But I don't believe in waving a magic wand and thinking that's going to solve the problem. It's not. I'm eyes wide open and willing to be bold in crossing boundaries we haven't yet crossed to address the demand side of this as well.